the genius design of medieval castles. The fire crackles softly, sending a warm glow across the room. You can almost feel the heat against your skin. The scent of burning wood drifting through the air. Outside, a quiet wind whispers through unseen trees, but here, in this gentle light, time seems to slow. And the past begins to stir. Tonight we journey back nearly 1,000 years to an age when great stone fortresses rose from green hills and misty valleys, when the word castle meant more than power or pride. It meant survival. It meant home. Imagine standing before one now. The air is cool, carrying the scent of wet earth and iron. Before you, towering walls of gray limestone stretch toward the clouds. Each stone, carefully cut, carefully placed, has seen centuries of sun and storm. These walls were built not for beauty but for strength. Yet there is something beautiful in their strength. Step closer. The massive gate looms above you. It's built with layers of oak, bound together by blackened iron. In the flicker of torchlight you can see faint marks, carved initials of the craftsmen who shaped them long ago. Their names may be lost, but their work still stands. Beyond the gate lies a world within walls. Narrow paths twist between towers, courtyards echo with the low murmur of voices, and banners drift lazily in the wind. The scent of bread drifts from the kitchens. A stable boy hurries past, his boots echoing on the cobblestones. Somewhere a blacksmith's hammer rings like a heartbeat. To the untrained eye it might seem chaotic, random even, but look closer, and you'll see the genius of design hidden within every line and corner. Every angle of stone, every curve of passage served a purpose. Castles were not just buildings. They were living machines. The architects of the Middle Ages were not called architects as we know them today. They were master masons, builders who learned their craft through years of apprenticeship and memory. They drew plans in chalk and dust, not ink and parchment. Yet somehow they created structures that could endure 1,000 years of war, fire, and storm. The first great castles were born from fear. Fear of invasion, fear of rebellion, fear of the unknown. When the Normans crossed the English Channel in 1066, they brought with them not only knights and horses, but a new idea of power made visible in stone. They built modern Bailey castles, quick wooden fortresses on artificial hills, but wood burns and wood rots. The next generation would be built from stone. Stone castles changed everything. They were symbols of order in a violent world, a visible promise that law, strength, and stability could survive even in chaos. From the moment one rose upon the horizon, it told everyone for miles around, "Here rules a lord." Now step inside the great hall, the heart of the castle. The fire burns in a massive hearth, filling the air with warmth and smoke. Shadows flicker on carved beams overhead. At the far end of the hall sits the Lord himself, wrapped in a heavy cloak, his eyes watching the flames. Behind him, a tapestry depicts scenes of battle and faith, knights riding beneath the sign of the cross, angels watching from above. The castle was more than a fortress. It was a world. Inside its walls lived soldiers, servants, cooks, blacksmiths, and scribes. Children grew up here. Lives began and ended beneath these roofs. In the stillness of the night, you could hear the creak of wooden stairs, the murmur of guards changing posts, the faint echo of distant laughter. Yet every beauty was born from strategy. Look at the staircases. They twist upward in tight spirals, always turning clockwise. Why? Because defenders running down the stairs could swing their swords freely with their right hands, while attackers climbing up would find their blades blocked by the curve of the wall. Even in stone, intelligence whispered. The windows were narrow slits, just wide enough for an arrow to pass through, but too small for an enemy to enter. The towers were placed so each could watch over the next, forming a ring of protection that never slept. The walls themselves were built in layers. Rubble, lime, and stone fused together like bone and muscle. And then there was the moat, cold, dark, and deceptively still. It wasn't just water. It was a mirror, reflecting the castle above, doubling its power in the eyes of those who approached. Crossing it was more than a physical challenge. It was psychological. It told an enemy, "This place does not belong to you." At night, when the fires burned low and the guards made their rounds, the castle seemed almost alive. The wind hummed through the arrow slits. The banners rustled in the dark. In the silence, one could imagine the stone itself breathing, remembering the centuries it had endured, every mark, Every scar on the wall was a story. Of sieges survived, of kings who ruled and fell, of love whispered behind heavy doors. Even now, when you walk through the ruins of those ancient places, you can feel it. The weight of time, the calm of endurance. The genius of medieval castle design wasn't just in how they defended, it was in how they endured. A castle could survive fire, war, and neglect because it was built with an understanding of balance. The builders knew the land. They studied the wind, the slope of the hill, the quality of the rock. They designed with nature, not against it, and so, even as centuries passed and empires crumbled, the castles remained, silent, patient, unbroken. Close your eyes now and imagine standing in one again under the pale light of dawn. The mist is rising from the fields below. The world is quiet, but the walls around you hum with the stories of 1,000 lives. Somewhere deep inside, the hearth still glows faintly. You can almost hear the crackle of fire, the same sound that fills the room you sit in now. History and present merge like two flames meeting in the dark. Sleep comes softly in such places, where time stands still, and stone remembers. Roman orgies, myth versus reality. The fire burns lower now. Its glow has deepened into a soft amber, casting shadows that sway gently across the room. You can hear the quiet hiss of a log splitting, and somewhere in that rhythm the past begins to whisper again. This time the whisper carries you farther back, to ancient Rome, a world of marble, music, and myth. The very word Rome stirs something within us. Images appear. Grand columns, glittering banquets, golden crowns, and whispers of forbidden pleasure. For centuries, stories of Roman orgies have been told and retold, tales of wild excess, of endless feasts and moral decay. But how much of it was real and how much was fantasy woven by those who came later, trying to make sense of a fallen empire? The truth always is softer, slower, more human. Imagine walking through a Roman villa at dusk. The air smells faintly of olive oil and rosewater. Light from oil lamps flickers against painted walls, illuminating scenes of gods and lovers, of vines and grapes, of nymphs dancing beside fountains. In the courtyard, water ripples quietly, catching the last shimmer of the evening sun. This is not chaos. It is elegance. It is control. The Romans, contrary to legend, were not constantly drunk on indulgence. Most Romans lived simple lives: farmers, soldiers, merchants, slaves. But the elite, the powerful few who ruled the Republic and later the Empire, they lived in a world apart. To them, a feast was more than food. It was theater, a performance of power. They dined not to eat, but to impress. The table was their stage, and every dish, every gesture was meant to show wealth, taste, and influence. In the great villas of Rome, banquets could last for hours, sometimes the entire night. Guests reclined on couches, not chairs, their left elbows resting on cushions while servants moved silently between them. Silver plates gleamed under lamplight. Musicians played soft melodies on flutes and lyres. Wine flowed, not the rough, earthy kind that common people drank, but wine sweetened with honey and spices, poured from glass vessels imported from the East. But indulgence does not always mean chaos. The truth of the Roman banquet was more ritual than frenzy. Every course was carefully ordered. The host watched everything: how his guests ate, how they spoke, who they flattered, who they ignored. Politics simmered beneath the surface like warm wine in a golden cup. Still, there were moments, rare, intoxicating moments, when the line between performance and passion blurred. When masks slipped and laughter grew too loud, and eyes met across the room for a second too long. That, perhaps, is where the myths were born. When later generations and the early Christians, the moral philosophers, the historians of the dark centuries, looked back on Rome, they saw its decline not as political or military, but as moral. They imagined its fall came from sin, from decadence, from the so-called orgies of emperors. But if you stand quietly in those ruins now, in the shadow of what once was the Villa of the Mysteries in Pompeii, or the grand dining halls of Nero's Golden House, you feel something different. Not madness, not lust, but longing. The human longing for beauty, for art, for escape. The Romans believed that pleasure itself was divine, a gift from their gods. To honor pleasure was not sin, but worship. They didn't see the body and soul as enemies. They saw them as partners in the experience of being alive, and yet they also knew excess could be dangerous. Seneca, the philosopher, once wrote, "It is not the man who has little, but the man who craves more, who is poor." His words echoed through marble halls, a warning whispered even in the midst of luxury. The orgy, as it came to be known later, was less about bodies and more about freedom, the temporary lifting of the world's burdens. For a night, status vanished, rules dissolved. Laughter, music, and the scent of wine filled the air, and everyone, emperor or slave, was briefly equal beneath the light of torches. But these were rare, whispered moments, not the daily life of Rome. The image of constant indulgence was painted centuries later, when those who conquered Rome needed to justify its fall. It was easier to say, they destroyed themselves through sin, than to admit that all empires, no matter how great, eventually crumble. The real Rome was far more complex, a place of contradictions. Stoic discipline and secret desire, law and chaos, beauty and brutality. Now close your eyes for a moment. Picture a Roman garden at night. The moonlight falls softly on marble statues, their faces serene. A fountain murmurs. Somewhere a lyre plays a slow, mournful tune. The guests have gone, the torches have burned out, and only the quiet remains. The quiet that outlives the empire. The quiet that still lingers in the stones. History remembers Rome for its grandeur and its fall. But listen closely and you'll hear something else. The heartbeat of a people who lived fully, who built roads that still carry travelers, aqueducts that still trace the landscape, words and ideas that still shape our minds. The myth of the Roman orgy is only a shadow, a reflection of our own imagination projected onto their walls. The truth is gentler, more fragile. The Romans celebrated life, sometimes too much, sometimes too little, but always with a sense of wonder for what it meant to be human. As the fire in the hearth flickers lower, the glow of ancient Rome fades too. Marble turns back to dust and the songs of the lyres dissolve into silence. The world drifts once more into the soft dark of sleep. And maybe that's the truest legacy of Rome, not the empire, not the legends, but the reminder that even at the height of power, beauty is fleeting and pleasure, like firelight, is brightest just before it fades. The tattoos of Viking women. The fire hums softly now, low and steady, like the quiet breathing of something ancient. Outside, night presses gently against the windows. In the warmth of the room, shadows dance and fade, and the mind drifts farther north, to a world of snow and salt and sea. The age of the Vikings was not born in silence. It was born in the roar of the ocean, in the crash of waves against wooden hulls and the chants of oarsmen rowing into the mist. But within that storm of steel and salt, there were also moments of grace, moments painted not in battle but in ink. Tonight, we listen to the hidden stories written on the skin of Viking women. For centuries, historians spoke mostly of men, the raiders, the warriors, the kings who sailed their longships across the world. Yet in the dim firelight of ancient halls, the women stood quietly beside them, holding the true heart of their culture, their beauty, their strength, their mystery. It was said to be marked by symbols that never faded. The tale of Viking tattoos begins far from the icy fjords, in the words of travelers who came to see them. Around the year 921, an Arab diplomat named Ahmad ibn Fadlan journeyed north to meet the Norse. What he saw astonished him. He described the men as tall, blonde, and tattooed from fingertips to neck with patterns of dark green, shaped like trees and knots. If the men carried such marks, what of the women? He did not say, perhaps out of modesty or mystery, yet the sagas, the poetry, and the fragments of myth that remain suggest that the women's markings were even more meaningful. Imagine one now, a Viking woman standing at the edge of the shore, the wind playing through her hair like silver threads. Her cloak is fastened with a bronze brooch, her eyes steady and clear. On her arms, faint lines of ink spiral like waves. They are not decoration, they are language. Every mark carried meaning. Some told of ancestry, a lineage traced through runes that curved like roots. Others spoke of faith, symbols of Odin, Freya, or the Valkyries, the divine maidens who chose the fallen in battle. Some were prayers for strength, for safe voyages, for love that outlasted death. The ink itself was made from soot, ash, and crushed plants mixed with animal fat, a black fire that would never fade. The designs were burned into the skin with bone needles, each prick a whisper of pain, each mark a vow. It was not vanity. It was transformation. To the Norse, the body was a vessel for stories. The soul, they believed, could be seen through the flesh, and to carve meaning upon the skin was to bring spirit into form. A woman's tattoos might show her devotion, her courage, or her role within the tribe. A mother might wear runes of protection over her heart. A widow might ink the sign of the raven, symbol of memory and watchfulness, went upon her wrist. In the flicker of torchlight, these marks would seem to move, to breathe. They were living art woven with belief and belonging. The Vikings lived in a world where the divine and the mortal often touched. Their gods were not distant beings in the sky. They were part of every wind, every wave, every heartbeat. Tattooing was a bridge between these realms, an offering to both the seen and the unseen. When the longship set sail, the women often remained behind, keeping the hearths burning and the children safe. But they were no less fierce. They ruled households, managed trade, and kept the memory of ancestors alive through song and story. Their tattoos were part of that inheritance, a promise inked into the fabric of who they were. Archaeologists have found small hints: needles, pigments, and combs carved with patterns that match ancient tattoo designs. And in the grave of a woman buried with a sword in Birka, Sweden, some believe there lies the echo of the shield maiden, proof that women fought beside men, their bodies marked not just with ink, but with the stories of the gods themselves. Close your eyes and picture her now, aboard a ship gliding through fog, the sea glowing faintly beneath the moon. She stands at the prow, a wolf pelt over her shoulders, her hands gripping the carved wood of the dragon's head. Her tattoos glimmer faintly, catching the silver light. She whispers to the wind, words no one remembers. But the sea carries still. It's easy to think of the Vikings as brutal, but to them, life and death were part of the same journey. Their art, their runes, their ink, all of it was a way to speak to eternity. The tattoos of Viking women were not rebellion. They were remembrance, a way to say, I was here. I am part of something that will never die. The fire flickers again, pulling you back from the cold seas. You can almost hear the creak of the longships fading into the distance, the sound of their oars melting into the rhythm of your own breath. In that rhythm, the ink remains. The designs, the symbols, the stories, all still there beneath the surface of time. They remind us that beauty and strength are not separate, and that the marks we carry, visible or not, tell the world who we are and where we have been. The Vikings are gone, their halls empty, their gods fading into myth. But when the northern lights dance across the sky, green and gold, twisting like runes on skin, it feels as if the tattoos of those ancient women have come alive again, painting the heavens with their eternal stories. The reign of King Gentius, 181–68 BCE. The fire burns low, a deep orange glow spreading across the wood. The sound of the crackle fades into a hum, soft and steady. The air feels older now, heavy with the scent of memory. Beyond the flickering light, another world begins to take shape. Long before the rise of the Roman emperors, before marble cities and imperial banners, there was a small kingdom by the Adriatic Sea, rugged, proud, and defiant. Its name was Illyria, and at its heart ruled a man history nearly forgot. King Gentius, the last king of the Illyrians, a name spoken quietly in the corners of dusty chronicles, overshadowed by Rome's triumph, but once his voice echoed across mountains and coasts. His ships ruled the narrow seas, and his people believed their freedom would never die. Imagine it now. The year is 181 BCE. The sun rises over the Dinaric Alps, washing the rocky hills in pale gold. The waters of the Adriatic shimmer below, dotted with wooden ships. In the distance, the walls of Skadra, his capital, gleam like white bone against green hills. Within those walls, the king stands at his balcony, watching the mist rise from the valleys. He is not an old man, but his eyes carry the weight of generations. Behind him lie centuries of warriors, tribes, and treaties, a people always between giants, caught between Greece and Rome, always resisting, always surviving. The Illyrians were seafarers and mountain fighters. They traded, they raided, they adapted, but Gentius was more than a warrior. He was a thinker, a man who tried to weave unity out of tribes divided by pride and distance.
His dream was not conquest.
It was independence. He strengthened his navy, reformed his laws, and sought alliances, with the Macedonians, with the Dardanians, with anyone who would help him stand against Rome's shadow spreading from the west. He minted coins bearing his name, each one a small act of defiance against a growing empire. In the great hall of Skadra, the fire burned like this one does now. Messengers arrived from distant coasts, their boots caked in salt and dust. They spoke of Roman fleets gathering, of envoys demanding tribute, of cities falling silent. Gentius listened, calm, patient. He had seen the empire before. He knew how it crept, not with armies at first, but with gold and promises. Still he refused to bow. When Rome declared war, the Illyrian hills erupted in defiance. Gentius warriors fought with the fury of the wind itself, swift, unseen, striking from forests and cliffs. His ships harassed Roman trade routes, his archers rained death from mountain passes. For a moment it seemed the fire of Illyria might hold. But empires do not sleep. In the spring of 168 BCE, 3 Roman legions crossed into his lands, a tide of iron and discipline. The battles were brief but brutal. The Illyrians fought with courage, but courage could not stop the slow machinery of Rome. One by one, the strongholds fell. At last, Gentius was cornered in Skadra. The city was surrounded. The river below ran dark with smoke and ash. And then silence. The king surrendered. They say he walked out alone to meet the Roman commander. His armor dented, his crown tarnished, but his head still high. The Romans, impressed by his dignity, spared his life, but not his freedom. He was taken in chains across the Adriatic, paraded through the streets of Rome as a symbol of victory. The crowd cheered. Flowers rained from the balconies. And in the midst of it all, the Illyrian king stood silently, eyes fixed on something beyond their glory. For them, he was a defeated man. For history, he became a ghost, the last breath of a free people. But if you travel today through the mountains of modern Albania and Montenegro, you can still feel the echo of his reign. In the ruins buried beneath moss and wildflowers, in the coins found by shepherds, in the quiet pride of the people who still call that land home, the Romans wrote of his fall. But the stones remember something else. They remember the mornings when smoke rose from the Illyrian hearths, when laughter echoed through the valleys, when children chased each other in the shadow of the citadel. Those memories never made it to the scrolls, but they linger in the earth, in the wind, in the rhythm of waves against the coast. As the centuries passed, Gentius became a whisper and Illyria a legend, yet his story carries a lesson that still burns softly. Like embers that never die, that freedom, once kindled, never truly disappears. It sleeps, waiting for the wind. Now as you listen to the fire in this quiet room, imagine that same flame flickering in a distant hall 2,000 years ago. A king standing in the half-light, his people gathered close. His heart heavy but unbroken. He speaks not to soldiers, but to the children before him, to the future that will inherit both the scars and the strength of their land. His voice is low, steady, like the sea against the rocks. He says, empires come and go, but the mountain endures. Remember that. The wind outside sighs softly. The fire crackles. The world drifts once more into stillness. And in that stillness, the story of Gentius, the forgotten king, finds peace at last. The hidden empires beneath the sands. The final part of the historical sleep story journey. The fire burns low now, a single glowing coal among the ash. The night feels older, the air heavier, and beyond the circle of warmth, silence stretches out like a vast desert, endless, shimmering, full of memory. Close your eyes. Let the crackle of the last ember fade into the hum of the wind. And imagine this, a sea of sand under a violet dawn. The horizon ripples like molten gold. The dunes breathe in waves, each one whispering to the next, carrying stories across time. This is where the earth hides its oldest secrets. Here lie the bones of forgotten kings, the ruins of cities swallowed by dust, the ghosts of empires that once shaped the world, and then vanished. Once, this desert was not silent. It was alive with caravans, temples, and songs. This was the cradle of lost realms, empires that burned bright then faded into legend. Among them was one seldom spoken of, the Empire of Garama, the heart of the ancient Garamantes. Long before Rome reached Africa, before Egypt's pyramids rose from stone, the Garamantes built their kingdom deep within the Sahara. Not along rivers, but beneath them. for under the sand flowed hidden veins of water, the fossil rivers of a greener world long past. The Garamantes found them, tamed them, and turned the desert into a garden. Imagine it, 4,000 years ago, under the same stars we see now. Villages of mud brick and palm stood like islands in a golden sea. Men and women walked barefoot on cool stone, their voices mingling with the rustle of date palms. At night, the desert sky was a black ocean bursting with stars, and beneath that infinite silence they built something remarkable. Their engineers carved underground tunnels, the fogaras, channels that brought water from deep aquifers to the surface, feeding crops in a place no one believed life could grow. To Rome, they were a mystery, a civilization thriving in the heart of nothingness. To themselves, they were heirs to the desert. They called their home Fazania. The caravans of Garama stretched for hundreds of miles, trading salt, gold, slaves, and ivory with kingdoms to the north and south. Their chariots cut across the dunes like ghosts, wheels slicing through sand as if on water. And in their capital, great towers rose from the earth, their walls painted red by the desert sun. But the desert has no mercy, only patience. Over time, the water veins thinned. The fogaras cracked. The wells ran dry. The wind came carrying sand grain by grain, covering fields, burying homes, swallowing memories. And as the centuries passed, Garama was forgotten. The Romans came searching for the lost cities. They found bones. The Arabs came chasing myths. They found silence. And then the explorers came, with maps and journals, and found the ruins shimmering in the heat like a mirage. Today, under the sands of southern Libya, archaeologists still uncover fragments, pottery, jewelry, inscriptions half buried in dust, each one a whisper, a heartbeat from a world that refused to die completely. Because even when empires fall, stories remain. They cling to the stones, the wind, the echoes that ripple through time. Somewhere, a traveler stands at dawn atop a dune. The air is still, the world painted in gold and shadow. He looks down and sees the faint outline of ancient streets beneath the sand, invisible to most eyes but alive in memory. He kneels, brushing away a handful of dust, and for a brief moment he touches the past. And perhaps the past touches him back, because beneath every desert there is a heartbeat, beneath every ruin a song, and beneath every silence a memory waiting to be heard. The fire fades now to a single glow. The storyteller's voice softens. We began in the mountains with the tribes of Illyria. We crossed the seas, the empires, the ages, and now we end here in the silence of the desert, where all stories return. The fire dies completely. The last ember turns to silver dust. The night stretches on, vast and eternal, and in that vastness you hear a single whisper, gentle like the breath of the earth itself. Nothing is truly lost. Everything sleeps, waiting to be remembered. And as those words settle in your heart, you drift, past time, past memory, past the veil of history, into sleep. Peaceful, still, enduring,